Disney has once again embarked on a live action remake of its most beloved IP. This time, Snow White gets the 2023 makeover. Out with the outdated patriarchal tale of a brave young woman finding her true inner strength as a prince finds her life so valuable, he's willing to stare death straight in the face to get to her. No. This is a film of self-actualization. If the non-dwarves and the misunderstood queen and the idiot prince would just get out of her way, then Snow White may be able to realize that she was already perfect just the way she is. People freaked out when the set photos of Snow White showed up on their Twitter feeds and Instagram feeds for several reasons. Now, a lot of these I think are distraction. First of all, Snow White in the animated and pretty much, all of the forms that have been made was a Caucasian woman. And the reason for that is because in the actual original fairy tale, it described her skin as being white as snow, which is literally where the name Snow White comes from. Now, don't care, right? The Little Mermaid is, no longer a white redheaded girl, and everybody freaks out over it. I think it's a distraction. These are fairy tales, right? And so you retell the story. And just recently, we didn't talk about it, but Supreme Court struck down affirmative action. And, this is one of the consequences of affirmative action is that anytime somebody who is from a minority background gets a role, affirmative action, hiring quotas, it gives people room to assume it was an affirmative action hire. And the person that's most unfair to is the person in that position. Because for all you know, they tested tons of people, and maybe this wasn't true. Maybe he was filling a quota. I don't know. But it assumes they weren't actually the best for the role, that they didn't come in and just kill it, and just all of the directors and producers were blown away. And it's like, look, I know Snow White's normally white, but man, this girl killed it. She would be amazing. It just kind of assumes that, and it projects that onto them, which is one of the ways affirmative action tends to hurt the people who get put in the positions, because it gives people the chance to assume they aren't there on their own merit. And it is why meritocracy is such a powerful system societally. But all of that aside, people are upset by that. They're upset because the dwarfs aren't dwarfs. There was like one little person and then all just normally sized people. And even not all of them were men, right? And the seven dwarfs were all men. And this is interesting because a lot of people are assuming this is because Peter Dinklage came out. Peter Dinklage, who is Game of Thrones and some other things. He came out, and when Snow White was being remade, he is like, man, that is just so wrong, and it just kind of makes fun of people with dwarfism. And interestingly enough, Peter Dinklage, who is a famous actor, may have cost 7 other people with dwarfism high-paying, famous jobs in this movie by complaining about this. And all of it just misses the allegory entirely. The thing about these fairy tales is they were built for kids, but they had deep interpretations to apply into life. Jonathan Pajot, who is a storyteller, he's redoing some of these famous fairy tales in order to just present the power of the allegories inside of them. Recently, I heard him in a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and they were talking about how the 7 dwarves who Snow White wakes up with, these represent like an extrapolation of men. And by the way, these are not dwarves like actual little people. These are mythological dwarfs. They're more akin to gnomes, like the traveling gnomes or the garden gnomes, who aren't real people or real individuals. And they're supposed to represent almost like a segmented version of what a full man would be. And so you can extrapolate out all of the best of the character of the 7 dwarfs, and you get something like a Prince Charming. And you can extrapolate the worst aspects of all 7 of them out, and you can get something like an evil villain. And she's having to learn how to cope with and live with these little versions of what masculinity offers her, when in her heart, what she's really longing for is Prince Charming. What you do is you ignore all of the allegory and you flatten out the piece altogether. Here, like, this little interview really gets to the heart of what I think is wrong, not just with what Snow White probably will be, and maybe it'll prove me wrong, but what it will probably be, and the problem with a lot of these remakes and just Hollywood in general today. Let's listen to just a few seconds of what we can expect out of the Snow White live action remake.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Snow White is running for president.
Okay, so this is not your 1930s Snow White, you know, the most beloved Disney movie of all time, the movie that started Disney in motion. Forget about all that old, antiquated dominance, hierarchy, patriarchy, nonsense, keeping women in their place. All she is just love struck and wants her Prince Charming. Blah, you know, all of that. That's a, you know. Okay, so what is it going to be then? It is going to be a journey of self-actualization. And this is a real problem for Disney movies right now, and for movies in general, is self-actualization versus the hero's narrative or the hero's journey. Pretty much stories for all time have followed the hero's journey, the hero's narrative. And this is like the basic principle of storytelling, which is you have someone who is stuck in their equilibrium. Their life is fine, but it's nothing spectacular, and they're certainly not a hero. There's an inciting incident where they are called into action, and then they go into chaos and they go into the unknown, and they have to fight their way through it. And there's all kinds of tension. Along the way, they meet a guide, and this guide helps bring them to the climactic point where they either are able to get rid of the parts of their character that are holding them back. They have new training and new skill sets that are built inside of them. It usually requires some form of higher level sacrifice. If they're able to do that, then they go into the falling action and they resolve in a heroic narrative. If they're not able to do that, they fall back into the chaos of the unknown, and it is a tragedy. And that is the story of someone who isn't all that they could be, who isn't living the life that they should be, who hasn't built the skill sets that they need, who isn't living as a hero, and they have to go through deep suffering and make massive mistakes and be led by a guide to the point where they can take on the heroic role that they were meant to play, and it changes their life forever. That's the hero's journey. What we do now is not the hero's journey, it's self-actualization. And self-actualization, there is no real struggle. The only struggles have nothing to do with the main character. It's not internal struggle. It's not lack of skill set. The only struggle is all of the incompetent idiots, usually men, around them, and all of the dominance hierarchies that are holding them back. In self-actualization, there is no guide. As a matter of fact, everyone that the main character meets, they end up being the guide for them. The main character is always the guide because they don't need a guide because they're perfect just the way they are. There's no real costly mistakes. Other people make mistakes sometimes in these narratives. And then the main character, who, remember, is already perfect, they fix those mistakes. And there's no development of missing skills. There's just the implementation of skills that have been repressed by all of the dominance hierarchy and all of the incompetent people around them. So this is like Mulan that Disney put out during the pandemic. This was a great example of this because the original story that was told in animation, it was of someone who was called into action and who struggled, way weaker than everyone else. I mean, Mulan was a woman and she dressed herself as a man and she was surrounded by men and she was super uncomfortable, and she tried to climb the pole and she couldn't even get 2 feet up there. And you know, she had to learn and grow and be broken down and go through heartache and struggle. And she had a guide that was given to her by the gods, Mushu, you know, who was an imperfect guide, but helped her along the way anyway. And she had some other men who came alongside her and helped her to grow and to develop. And eventually she's willing to sacrifice of herself to save the dynasty. In the new Mulan, the live action remake, they put aside the hero's journey, and instead it was a story of self-actualization. The first time we see Mulan, she can like walk on air like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and she's kind of magical. And if she will just embrace who she already is, already perfect, then she'll be fine. When she gets to camp, the training montages are completely different. She can outwork everyone. She's stronger than everyone. She effortlessly beats everyone. She carries things up the hill that nobody else can carry. She's already perfect. She doesn't need a guide. She doesn't need to change. She's just perfect the way she is. And the only thing holding her back is the incompetence of the people around her. Even though most people going to these movies are not analyzing them at this level of story, they just fall flat. Because there's something inside of us that longs to be called into the hero's journey. There's something inside of us that longs to get up off of our couches and off of scrolling our phones and be called into the adventure of a lifetime. And we know ourselves. We know that we can't actually walk on air. We know that we aren't already stronger than everyone. We know that we are broken and flawed in so many ways that we desperately need help. And the hero's journey is applicable to everyone. You're not what you could be. You're screwed up in significant ways. You're lacking skill sets. But if you will get off your couch and get off social media and get into the real world and try something significant and be willing to sacrifice and get a guide in your corner and climb the mountains and go through the struggle and die to yourselves and sacrifice for others, you can live as a hero too. And the story of self-actualization is you're perfect exactly the way you are. Get out of my room, mom. Stop telling me what to do. If only everyone would get in my way. If only I wasn't oppressed by the hierarchies around me, then I could just fully spread my wings and fly. And it's not how life works. And that is how you become depressed and anxious and lonely, because you buy the lie, you're perfect just the way you are. You don't need a guide. You don't need help. And you do need help. And you do need a guide. And you do need to get some of the crap out of yourself that is holding you back. And you do need to build new skill sets that can only come through suffering and through struggle. We have to be willing to do that work. And look, the other problem with this, so self-actualization is a real problem. The other problem is whether we're better together as complementary sexes or whether we're better as independent individuals. You heard them say two things. Number one, this is a journey of self-actualization. And number two, hey, don't worry, guys. This is not about Snow White being in love with a prince. The story of the prince is a man who is so enamored and so highly values Snow White or Sleeping Beauty or fill in the blank with fairy tale characters. So enamored that they are willing to lower their station. They are willing to fight the dragon. They're willing to go to the depths of chaos. They're willing to wander into the unknown of the forest. They are willing to stare death in the face because this woman is so valuable to them. What's wrong with that? I don't understand. And in none of these stories, it's like there are co-equal heroes. I watched Snow White as a kid. And it wasn't like, wow, man, Snow White, it sure is helpless. What an idiot. It's a good thing that the prince is there. They were like co-heroes who complemented one another. I've not seen the Barbie movie. Not gonna, okay? I heard there was going to be a Barbie movie, and I thought, Clayton, are you going to see this? And something said to me, no, but it's huge. It's a huge marketing campaign. Maybe I should see it. No. Okay, but really, it could make a good podcast episode. And finally, no. And I said, you're right, Michael Scott. I will not see it. But I've read some long form reviews. I've watched some long form reviews. And I actually don't care about spoiling it, but I won't, I guess. All I can say is like the core of the movie is men and women are not better together. They're better as independent individuals. And this is the lesson that we're teaching more and more often in our movies today, is not these complementary forces. You'll remember that like at the very beginning of it all, what scripture says is it is not okay for Adam to be alone. I will make him a helpmate. And it's like, oh yeah. Well, that's the woman's role. She's just the helper. Those words in the Hebrew, but what they actually mean is someone to come in as a helpful adversary, a complementary force to help you be all that you can be. And that's the role that we play with each other. And we're throwing that out, and we throw it out, I really do think, at great cost to ourselves and great cost to the stories that we are wanting to tell, and great cost to the hero's narrative, and great cost to what we're teaching young men and women about the power of a union between two people who love each other so much that they are willing to go to the depths of chaos for one another, not just swipe right every once in a while and have a hookup, but fight the dragon. And that should be the goal. That is a good lesson. I want my daughter to learn that lesson, that the only man who is worthy of you is a man who is willing to actually go out and fight the dragon to get to you. That is a good lesson. And you're just better by yourself, just an autonomous, independent woman. You don't need no man. That's a lesson that we're watching play out in real time, and it is not functioning well in our society. So Snow White's not white. Who cares? The dwarfs aren't dwarfs. Who cares? There's no snow. Who cares? What actually matters is we've thrown aside the hero's narrative for self-actualization, and we've decided that men and women are not better together. We're just better as independent individuals. And here is my prediction. This movie will go just as poorly as their other remakes. Nobody really knows exactly why they're failing, but I think we've touched on some of those reasons today.